helping their women through the situation. It's very emotional, it's a roller coaster, and it's never guaranteed. At my age, we were guaranteed like a 20% chance of a live birth.
Wow. We're having a Capra combo segment today with my very dear sweet friend, second daughter, Andrea Winnubst. And Dennis recently interviewed her, but we have so much ground to cover, and we were discussing earlier just all the hard things that the church doesn't always get around to talking about. And really, there are biblical solutions to these things. So Andrea is tell about your business really quick, what you do for your livelihood.
So I am a freelancer and I build websites and do digital marketing for companies.
So if you get our newsletter, she assists us with the newsletter, is a part of our church, but has such experience in missions work in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And then, but recently they just talked about trafficking because you've been involved in bringing awareness and stopping human trafficking. But now we want to talk some about how God is the source of life. And we want to talk about, just the pro-life movement, the fact that recently having Roe versus Wade overturned, tell what that does for us now as a nation.
Oh, I mean, it just gives each state the opportunity to determine what they believe life begins at. Is it conception? Is it 6 weeks when you hear the heartbeat? And so that's what states are having to determine. And then they're having to determine when is it acceptable beyond a certain stage, whether it's rape, incest, or, medical issues that are putting the mother's life in danger.
And so I know that my own daughter has a sweet little baby boy that is 3 years old, and she conceived him through using IVF. And now you're pregnant, going to have a sweet baby boy soon. Tell about this IVF journey, and then we'll talk about the moral compass of it all.
Yeah. So my husband and I began our IVF journey in May of 2022. And throughout our journey, we had to determine all sorts of belief systems of where do we believe life begins at. Is it our little baby embryo that we are trying so hard for? Is it conception when they implant the embryo into me? Is it the 6 weeks when we hear that first heartbeat? And it's been a journey that has been really hard. IVF is not easy for women, for the men who are helping their women through the situation. It's very emotional, it's a roller coaster, and it's never guaranteed. At my age, we were guaranteed like a 20% chance of a live birth.
Wow.
After all of the money that we've spent on the treatments and all of the cycles that we went through.
That is stunning to me, that percentage. I didn't realize that was like that. But what a miracle then. It just points to the fact that when the percentage is like that for your age and whatever else, the fact that God brings forth new life this way is miraculous.
Yeah, and that is something that we have been very thankful for. It's been a definite process where I've had to trust God throughout each single step of IVF. If I didn't have God in my life, I don't know how I would have gotten through some of the emotional roller coasters of having a failed cycle or not getting the results we wanted at each cycle, or the fear of even once the embryo is implanted, like your success rate is not very high or likely, and you're doing all of these treatments to your body in hopes for a baby. And if you don't have God, I don't know where your hope's coming from, because it was God who really walked us through this and held our hand, and the scriptures that we were able to speak over ourselves and our baby and bringing life into that womb.
So it really is a trusting God, knowing He's good, knowing there are promises we can hold on to for each step. I think about this when people talk about this and they referred to, oh, you're having a science baby. That is so goofy and ignorant and not a good thing to say. Because the truth is, we're spirit, soul, and body.
Yeah.
That's how God created us. And he's given us the ability to procreate. But it says in Hebrews 12, and I'm not going to read it out of the Passion, but it talks about submitting to the Father of spirits and living when we're disciplined by the Lord. And when I read that first about the Father of spirits, it helped me to understand you can do what you do to have a baby, and you can do what you can do with IVF, and you can explain that, but God's the one that gives the spirit. That person comes from God.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, science helped take the sperm and the egg. They helped me grow more eggs so that we would have a higher chance of having a mature egg that fertilized correctly with the sperm. And science did take that and put it in a petri dish. But from that point on, science doesn't do much. The technicians didn't do much. They put it in a petri dish and just set it aside to let it do what it naturally does, what God naturally intended, for it to fertilize, and then for each day over the next 5-6 days for it to turn into that blastocyst. That's God. God breathed life into that sperm and that egg to fertilize, and then carried it into a blastocyst. And then at that blastocyst stage, they either put it into a fresh transfer or they freeze it and prepare you for a frozen transfer. And if it's a fresh transfer, the hope is that that blastocyst keeps growing once it's transferred into the uterus. And if it's frozen, then it stops growing for that stage. But then when they take it out and unfreeze it before the transfer, the hope is that it hatches and starts growing immediately. And, by miracle, ours hatched immediately and started growing. And so it shows you that, God is life, and he breathed life into our blastocyst and our embryo that was then transferred. And then he took the control and continued to grow our baby over each week of life. And we got to hear that heartbeat, and we've got to see him grow from tiny, tiny little cell into a little human who's, I'm 5 months now, and we get to see his heartbeat, and we get to see his head, and we get to see his spine, and we get to see his legs and his fingers. And that is the miracle within itself.
Such a miracle. And what a beautiful, and I've gotten to see the sonogram pictures. So sweet. It's so miraculous. And it's just astounding what God does. And when you talk about those different procedures, so you're saying that the conception, which life begins at conception, that happens in your case with the IVF when they put that in a dish.
Yeah, it was a decision my husband and I had to make, because as you're filling out the contracts for IVF clinics, you have to determine before you even started your IVF cycles whether or not what you're going to do with the embryo or extra embryos. If you only want, like, say, one kid and you get one kid from your one embryo, but you have 3 other embryos, what are you going to do with them?
So this is the ethical part that's maybe not always talked about, and we're addressing it today.
Yeah. And so and in your contracts, your husband and you have to have the exact same answer. You can't have one and he has another. Like, the contracts won't be accepted if you both don't agree. And so it was a conversation that we had to have. What do we do with our embryo? Do we discard it? Do we give it to science for further research and further knowledge and how to better the IVF cycles? Or do we keep it and try to transfer it? And it was something that we had to sit down together and really discuss, like, what do we believe life begins at? Because it's something that I never thought about before, because mainly if you're having a child in, a natural way, you don't have to worry about that embryo that's sitting in a, frozen place waiting for you. But it was something that we pondered and recognized that if one embryo is a baby to us, why isn't another embryo a baby to us? And so during the whole process, I prayed, and my husband prayed, that we would only get the embryos that God intended for us to have as children, because I didn't want more than what we were supposed to have and then have to worry about, we don't need 10 embryos and 10 babies, that's impossible. So we don't want to discard them, because to us, that was a baby.
Absolutely.
And it was something that we had to determine in that moment. And so it gives you a whole new perspective on where life begins.
Yeah. And when I think about it, you tell what you concluded.
Yeah, we concluded that all of our embryos are important. And so we have 2 healthy embryos that took a lot of work to get. And we lost some embryos just in the natural process of they stopped growing. And so we determined life for us began at that embryo stage.
Yes. So when I think about it, I automatically remember talking to my daughter about it. And if there's extra embryos, I'm thinking those children need to come forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are people that are trying to adopt or want to have a baby and going this route. They can have a baby, and it would be your DNA, but it would come forth and be given life and be able to grow and live. And I just think that would be a beautiful thing.
Yes, you can also donate your embryo to be adopted out.
And that to me is the answer, and not to discard an embryo. No way.
Yeah. And I've heard stories where some women, they end up transferring multiple embryos, hoping that one takes, because again, it's science. Science isn't perfect. And so it's not 100% that you're going to have all live births for however many embryos you transfer. And some women, they end up getting pregnant with multiples, and they only wanted one. So they then go in and have the others aborted. And to me, it just breaks my heart, because they worked so hard, for those embryos. And then they've now brought life to multiple embryos, and then they chose to discard that embryo.
And I just want to say this too. In Psalm 103, it talks about, God's forgiveness for us. And it says that God removes our iniquity as far as the east is from the west.
Yes.
And so that's just one verse out of multiple. When you've done something you regret, is wrong, you've come to the Lord, now I made these wrong choices as a young person. I went through that myself over 45 years ago, and I suffered so much emotional guilt and shame until the Lord told me, you've got to give that to me and receive my forgiveness, and don't take it lightly what he'd done for me. And so I was able to go free from the shame and condemnation and guilt for making a wrong choice. So even though we're talking about giving life, and life begins at conception, we know realistically that there are people that have made the wrong choice. And even in this, we're just trying to bring it to light. I read an article Dutch Sheets had come out with, saying all these areas where the church is not addressing things. So today we're wanting to do that. So thank you for bringing that to us today. And Andrea, tell your business website or email so people could contact you with questions about that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. So you can visit my website at awcreativedigital.com. And then from there's contact address to email me, or you can go to the contact page as well.
Awesome. So I just want to pray as we close. But Father, I pray for everybody watching today that's hearing us, this has piqued or sparked curiosity and interest, or even if you have not been able to have children and you want to know about this. God, I thank you for giving your wisdom and your truth and encouragement to the women to believe you and trust you for your goodness to manifest in their life, for new children to come forth after watching this today. In Jesus' name.